Balance of Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kristi Gupta, I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, Trump accuses China of conspiring against the U.S. with Putin and Kim.
I thought it was a beautiful ceremony. I thought it was very, very impressive. But I understood the reason they were doing it, and they were hoping I was watching, and I was watching. My relationship with all of them is very good. We're going to find out how good it is over the next week or two.
President Trump, while meeting with Poland's president in the Oval Office, giving oxygen to his conspiracy theory against the leaders of China, Russia, and North Korea, as the news show of force was on full display in Beijing.
Plus, the president's drive to reshape the Federal Reserve reaches a new milestone. We'll preview the Senate hearing taking place tomorrow as Stephen Miran prepares to take the hot seat. Banking Committee Ranking Member Senator Elizabeth Warren joins us in moments from now.
Also tonight, D.C., L.A., and soon New Orleans. The president publicly threatens to send the National Guard to the Big Easy. What he said as his own Attorney General and Homeland Security Secretary were on the ground there. We'll have a live report coming up from Louisiana. And we'll speak with Florida Congressman Byron Donalds about that and much more.
And the administration ramping up its pressure on wind energy. The move, we're now reporting, with the White House working to block the development of more offshore wind projects. Plus, the impact those moves are having on the industry when Energy Secretary Wright joins us up ahead. We've got all that for you tonight, plus exclusive reporting on Apple's push into AI when we go to Romaine Bostick for tonight's Power Moves. We start, though, at the White House, with Donald Trump sitting down with Poland's president, commenting on everything from the Ukraine war and relations with China to the National Guard, the economy, and much, much more. Joining us now right here in Washington with the latest is Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams. Nick, we got a ton of inflow of information. Shocker. What stood out to you?
Well, I mean, a couple of things. I think this was a very successful visit for the Polish president. He essentially got a guarantee from President Donald Trump that the U.S. would not abandon Poland as it looks to potentially reorient its troops around Europe. You saw the solidity of that relationship. Poland has walked this tricky balance between both being a strong ally of the president and also being a key supporter of Ukraine. So you didn't see a lot of distance or a lot of separation there. And then obviously this signaling by the president, as we saw at the top of the show there on this meeting in China, just the fact that he thought this was a big, impressive ceremony, but it is clearly an event that was essentially oriented to have three leaders sort of thumb their nose at the president and solidify their own relationship, which in previous times was exactly what U.S. presidents had sought to avoid.
He seemed to notice that. Nick went on Truth Social and wrote, among other things, to President Xi, "Please give my warmest regards to Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-Un as you conspire against the United States of America." What are they conspiring on?
Well, I mean, you know, it's always difficult to get inside the president's head. Suffice to say, this is a relationship between the three of them that has been growing for quite some time. China has a longstanding relationship with North Korea, and despite the best U.S. efforts, China and Russia seem to only be solidifying their relationship, even though the Biden administration really sought to pull China away from Russia. But I think what you're seeing the president signal there is a concern about what happens next in Ukraine. We know that China has provided some support, though the past administration was careful to say it was not providing direct battlefield support to Russian forces in Ukraine. But we do know North Korea has actually sent troops to Ukraine, which has been a crucial asset for Vladimir Putin. So I think there's a lot of concern there. As President Trump seeks to withdraw U.S. support for Ukraine, what happens on the other side? What do their adversaries do? Yeah. Do they strengthen? And does that then trigger the president to say, OK, we now actually have to do something to support? Possible that's what he was alluding to there, and that you'll see in a week or two thing he mentioned at the top of the show, but hard to say.
Really interesting, and you wonder if he would have made the same remarks about Poland if he hadn't seen those optics coming out of Beijing. Right. Bloomberg's Nick Wadhams, thank you so much for getting us started here. The major step in President Trump's effort to reshape the Federal Reserve starts tomorrow during a much-anticipated committee hearing on Capitol Hill with the president's chair on the Council of Economic Advisors, Stephen Miran, who you've heard and seen on this program before, testifying for an interim role on the Federal Reserve. Libby Cantrell, PIMCO Managing Director, Head of Public Policy, was on surveillance earlier today, said this about the process.
I think the market sort of just assumes that whomever the president, any president nominates, they'll likely get confirmed. And I think for in most cases that is true. But for this particular position and this particular context, we do think that any sort of Fed nominee is going to be really questioned by Democrats, of course, but also by Republicans. And remember that the first step towards Senate confirmation is through the Senate Banking Committee.
Helping to set the table for what will be a hearing beginning tomorrow morning and ending around lunchtime. Kristi, this is going to be quite a job for Stephen Miran, who may not have signed up to take all the flack surrounding Lisa Cook, which I suspect will motivate a lot of Democrats' questions tomorrow.
Motivate a lot of questions, motivate a lot about the prepared remarks that have already been addressed in terms of the independence that he suggests is needed. Yeah. A lot of doubts being cast on that.
Well, we're going to talk to someone who knows a bit about this and will loom large in this hearing tomorrow. Joining us now live from Capitol Hill is Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, the ranking member on the Senate Banking Committee, who I suspect has a few questions ready for Mr. Miran. Senator, welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio. In the first hearing for Stephen Miran to join the Federal Reserve Board of Governors, we'll see this tomorrow. His opening remarks, some of his prepared remarks were released. And he writes, in my view, the most important job of the central bank is to prevent depressions and hyperinflations. Do you agree with him? And do you believe him?
Look, can we just back up just a tiny little bit? And that is, the Banking Committee should be holding a hearing tomorrow. But it should not be a business as usual, let's grease the skids and run through Donald Trump's nominee for the Fed. Instead, we should be having an oversight hearing about Donald Trump's unprecedented attacks on the independence of the Fed. He has made 3 hard runs at the Fed over the past few months, trying to fire Jerome Powell just on his own, trying to fire Jerome Powell for cause, trumping up charges around how much money he had spent in the Fed building rehabilitation, and now trying to fire Lisa Cook. Donald Trump is making a move to try to destroy the independence of the Federal Reserve Bank, unlike anything that has ever been done in American history. And right now, the Republicans who run the committee are saying, let's just have a business as usual. Let's bring up the Donald Trump nominee and move him on through. And I just want to be clear. I think that is a mistake. I think we have a responsibility to address this question of Fed independence first.
Senator Warren, let's talk about Lisa Cook there in the seat that, of course, is getting a lot of attention. Your colleague from North Carolina, Senator Tillis, earlier today said he would not consider nominating someone to take her place while the litigation was ongoing. If the Supreme Court, for example, does rule, in fact, that while the litigation is ongoing to figure out whether her firing was, in fact, legal, would you be willing to block Donald Trump's nominee to fill that seat?
Look, Donald Trump cannot fire Lisa Cook based on at least the facts or non-facts that have been presented thus far. Again, this is about independence of the Fed and Donald Trump's efforts to seize control over the Fed. And yes, I would try to block that. And I would think the Republican senators who also care about independence of the Fed would do the same. You know, I just want to remind everyone why we have an independent Fed. And that's true whether you have a Democrat in the White House or a Republican in the White House. You, in theory, have a group of people out there who look at the economic numbers and they make decisions on things like interest rates as best they can based on those numbers, not based on political pressure from the President of the United States. If Donald Trump destroys that, sure, he may be able to get what he wants on interest rates in the short term, but he undermines confidence in the Fed and its decision making and its rate setting. We've seen this before. When autocrats have taken over central bank in places like Turkey, what happens is interest rates shoot through the roof. And that is a real problem for our economy. Everybody has a stake in an independent Fed, and to let Donald Trump just destroy that without even pushing back is a terrible mistake.
Senator Warren, I hear you, but if the Supreme Court rules that a nominee can actually take her place, how do you plan on blocking that?
Well, I'm in the minority. I understand that. But I would try to persuade my Republican colleagues that it would be a terrible mistake to help Donald Trump, in effect, destroy the independence of the Fed. Look, this is nothing new in the sense that, go back and look at it. There are many Republican senators who in times past have talked about the importance of the independence of the Fed. Because like I say, that's not like a Democratic position or a Republican position. Nope. It's a position that those of us who try to watch this about how regulation of the economy works understand that from the beginning, providing some insulation for the financial decision makers, like the people who set interest rates, to insulate them from the political side of the house, from the President of the United States, is ultimately good for the economy. And it's why our Fed's interest rate setting is the gold standard for the world. And Donald Trump wants to burn that down.
Senator, I know that this sounds like it's turning into a hearing that will be atypical tomorrow and something that we're going to be watching and bringing to our viewers and listeners here on Bloomberg. I do want to ask you about a couple of other stories that are making news today, and one that's from the New York Times that has to do, strangely, with the New York mayoral race. Not something I would tend to ask you about, but Donald Trump is reportedly considering giving roles to some of the candidates in the New York mayoral race, including Eric Adams, for potentially a job at HUD. The idea would be, including, by the way, Curtis Sliwa as well, to clear a lane for Andrew Cuomo. I don't know if you buy that reporting, but you would have to clear a nominee to run HUD, correct? Is that something you would be prepared to do, Secretary Adams?
Well, it depends on what he is nominated for. There are a lot of jobs at HUD that don't require Senate confirmation. We already have a head of HUD. I don't know what Donald Trump is proposing, but the part that's triple underlined here is that Donald Trump supports Andrew Cuomo to be mayor of New York, period. That's all this is about. And he is willing to bring the force of the United States government, to use his tools as president of the United States, not on behalf of the people of the United States, not on behalf of finding the best nominee for position at HUD, but to be able to manipulate the mayoral race to try to help Andrew Cuomo in New York City. I think that's not only wrong for Donald Trump, I can't imagine that this is going to make the people of New York City say, woo-hoo, Andrew Cuomo is my guy. I think this is going to make the people of New York City say, our city is not for sale to Donald Trump.
Well, we'll see where this story goes, Senator. It does seem we can't get away from the story surrounding the Jeffrey Epstein files. And I know that there are a series of approaches on Capitol Hill right now to get the files released and to shed a light on the stories of victims who held a news conference today. President Trump was asked about this in the Oval Office as he sat next to the president of Poland. Part of his response was, quote, "It's really a Democrat hoax. I know that no matter what you do, it's going to keep going," unquote.
Yeah.
Is he right? This is a Democrat hoax?
No. Look, this is not the Democrats. This is Donald Trump's own statements when he was running for president of the United States. Go back and play the clips. When he and other Republicans promised that if Donald Trump became president and Republicans were in control, they were going to release all of the Epstein files. So do it. Just do it. And I don't mean release part of them, do a little blackout, a little here, a little there. That's what's keeping this story alive. And you really have to ask yourself, if Donald Trump wants this story to go away, the way to do that is release all of the documents. And if he thinks that's not going to work, what's in those files?
Elizabeth Warren, I'm sure we will find out. A final question to you. We're perhaps circling back to where we started, this time on the economy. One of the big criticisms that we know Jay Powell has faced from various members of Washington, including Donald Trump, and I believe from yourself as well, is not cutting interest rates in the face of inflation. It's something Stephen Miran has been talking about quite significantly as well. Can you just explain to our Wall Street audience that's tuning into this program here why rate cuts make sense if there's a risk of exacerbating the impact of Donald Trump's tariffs on inflation.
So I started in 2 years ago saying that the data on inflation, showing that inflation was coming down, that inflation was under better control, meant that Powell should start rate cuts. I thought that was entirely appropriate. I did my best to persuade him in a very public way, and obviously I did not succeed. They did one rate cut, but that was it. Now what Powell himself said last month was, if Donald Trump had not created so much chaos with the tariffs and what he's done to the economy, that the Fed would have cut rates last February. So think about that. That means that basically for 6 months now, Americans have been paying more on their credit cards, they've been paying more on interest on their car loans, and more on interest on home mortgage, home equity lines of credit, paying more because of the chaos that Donald Trump has created with tariffs. So look, I've been someone who thinks interest rates should come down, but the biggest obstacle to that happening is Donald Trump himself. If he wants to see interest rates come down, then stop creating this kind of chaos in the economy and stop this tariff 50%, 10%, 127% that keeps businesses from being able to plan, keeps businesses from buying new equipment and making investments, keeps businesses from hiring more people. Donald Trump is the #1 reason in America that we do not have a lower interest rate today.
Senator Warren, we'll have to wrap up the conversation there. Ranking Banking Committee member Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts, we thank you so much for your time.
Now with a closer look on where markets closed today, we turn to power moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. Romaine?
Yeah, this is the easy one today. All the power in the markets came from Apple and Alphabet. In fact, without those two names, the S&P would have finished the day in the red. It did gain about 0.5%. This on the back of that U.S. antitrust ruling that was favorable to Alphabet and its Google Chrome server, and more importantly, favorable to the relationship that Apple has with Google as well. And a little bit earlier today, we learned from Mark Gurman, citing people familiar with the situation, that relationship will deepen as Apple is set sometime early next year to unveil its AI strategy, an integration with Siri, and an integration that would include a partnership with Google and Gemini. Those are two of the big movers in the cash session, but I want to turn your attention to the after-hours trade. The biggest mover in the after-hours trade right now, that is American Eagle, the retailer, up more than 20% in the after-hours trade after reporting earnings that, quite frankly, weren't actually good. Sales are down about 1%, but of course, this is a stock that has now, one way or another, become thrust into the culture wars. It's a stock that rallied more than 20% since late July, after the company unveiled that Sydney Sweeney ad, an ad that a lot of people found offensive and a lot of other folks on the other side of the aisle, found, I don't know if encouraging is the right word, but the company addressing that in its press release, raising its guidance, reinstating its guidance, I should say, for the full year. And now a lot of people speculating that we could maybe anticipate an acceleration in sales. Remember, that ad came out on July 23rd. The company's quarter ended on August 2nd, so we really haven't seen much of an impact of that. And for those companies thinking that they don't want to be caught up in the culture war, the company's saying that Sydney Sweeney campaign will continue, Joe. Maybe a nod to the late, great Oscar Wilde, who once quipped here that the only thing worse than being talked about is not being talked about at all.
The horror, the scandal. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick walking us through the market moves. We thank you so much. Back here in Washington, survivors of Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking ring called on Congress to pass legislation that would require the Trump administration to release all unclassified material gathered in a federal investigation of the operation, including information on clients who abused underage girls.
Transparency is justice. Release the files, end the secrecy, and stand with us in declaring that no one, no billionaires, no politicians, not world leaders, is above the law. Now together as survivors, we will confidentially compile the names we all know were regularly in the Epstein world. And it will be done by survivors and for survivors.
A heart-wrenching day in Washington. Let's get another voice. Republican Congressman Byron Donalds of Florida, who's also running to be the state's governor, joins the program. Thank you so much for your time today. I'll start with a very simple question, given the events of the day. Should Speaker Mike Johnson bring that vote to the floor, how would you vote?
Well, let's be clear about what's happening in Congress today. First of all, I do support the release of the files. There are actually two provisions that are moving through Congress. One is the discharge petition by Representative Massey and Khanna. The other is actually being brought by Chairman Comer of the Oversight Committee. And so what I do support is the Oversight Committee's approach to making sure that that information is gone through, that survivors are protected, and then those files are released. And so there are some concerns on the Hill about Representative Massey's approach, that it would not actually protect survivors who, by the way, some of which have not come forward, some of which may choose not to be known publicly. I think this has to be a systematic process about how we release those files if Congress is going to make that order, because, to be honest with you, we've never released the files from a criminal investigation before, not to my knowledge, in Congress. So this is something that has to be done in a systematic process, in my view.
So yes on the oversight, no on the discharge petition. Congressman, we appreciate the straight answer as always, and it's good to have you back. I wonder if you heard what President Trump today had to say about this. He was in the Oval Office and reporters were asking about a lot of different stories. This was something that he was specifically asked about because of the survivors who were speaking today in Washington. I want to listen to what he said, have our audience here, and we'll have you respond. Here's the president.
I understand that we were subpoenaed to give files, and I understand we've given thousands of pages of files. And I know that no matter what you do, it's going to keep going. We're having the most successful 8 months of any president ever. And that's what I want to talk about. That's what we should be talking about, not the Epstein hoax.
He also went on to say it's really a Democrat hoax today, Congressman. Is he right?
Well, I think what the president is speaking about is that the Democrats have been failures when it comes to public policy facing the American people. So Donald Trump now comes back to Washington, D.C. as president of the United States, commander-in-chief. And for the last 8 months, he's had the most successful presidential administration in the modern era. And so the only thing that Democrats can hang on to is Epstein. And I think that's what the president is talking about, is that the Democrats are using the Epstein. Hold on. Let's be clear. The Democrats are using the Epstein files as a way to distract from the successes that Donald Trump is having. And any chief executive would be frustrated with that. That is an honest thing to be frustrated about. We know the Democrats don't care about the Epstein files. When Joe Biden was president, Nancy Pelosi was speaker, they didn't move heaven and earth to release those files. They actually wanted to hide what was going on with the Epstein files, unless it meant trying to harm Donald Trump, and they know that they could not do that. And so that's where the frustration from the president is coming. I think that the president, on the way down, it's about, yes, being transparent with the American people. Like I said, in the Oversight Committee, we have a resolution that's going to move forward in a systematic process to release that information to the public. But be clear, the Democrats don't care about Epstein. And they don't care about the survivors. Let's be really clear about that. What they do care about is creating a political circus to try to damage Donald Trump and distract from the successes of his administration.
Of Democrats when it comes to survivors. I obviously don't know what their thoughts are there, and I realize you're questioning their politics behind this, but you're not suggesting that the crimes perpetrated by Jeffrey Epstein are a hoax.
No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying that whatsoever. Remember, Donald Trump, when he found out what Epstein was doing around Mar-a-Lago, what did he do? He kicked him out of Mar-a-Lago, revoked his membership, and removed him. So let's not sit here and say that the president was covering up for this guy. That is not accurate, and the history actually demonstrates that. But what President Trump is talking about is, look at all the successes happening in our country today. Don't let the Democrats try to steal a news cycle so that the American people lose focus off of the positive things happening in our country to focus on the Jeffrey Epstein files. What Jeffrey Epstein did was a travesty. It was a monstrosity to women who were victimized by him and by Ghislaine Maxwell. But let's also make sure that we're keeping focus on the great things that are happening in the country today. And that's my point. The Democrats are using this for politics. They don't care about the survivors.
Representative Donalds, let's talk about the shutdown discussions or the fears here that are plaguing Washington. We know you are looking for a critical vote in those discussions. Very quickly, tell us what you're pushing for in those budget negotiations.
Well, look, right now, what we needed to find a pathway to do is cut spending. And I've been consistent about that with the White House, House leadership, my time here on the Hill. Let's cut spending and be responsible with the dollars of the American people. Let's spend their money efficiently and appropriately. And so we'll see what House leadership comes up with. There's some discussions around a continuing resolution. I think it's important for the American people to know a continuing resolution would actually be a spending decrease year over year. So there are some positive elements to that.
We've only got 10 seconds left, Congressman. Are we going to avoid a shutdown, just to be clear?
I think so. I think we will.
It's good to have you back. Byron Donalds of Florida.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg. Alongside Kristi Gupta, I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. In just moments, Energy Secretary Wright will be joining the program to discuss the administration's moves impacting the energy sector. But first, here's some of the stories we're watching tonight in our Power Brief. A day after President Trump dramatically stepped up the military's role in the Caribbean with a strike on a Venezuelan drug cartel, Secretary of State Marco Rubio met with Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum, with trade and security at the top of the agenda. Sheinbaum has voiced fears of the U.S. encroaching on Mexican sovereignty. Rubio, following his Sheinbaum meeting up with a bilateral press conference with his Mexican counterpart.
Several states are now banding together in the wake of the exodus of leaders at the CDC, with the governors of California, Oregon, and Washington announcing the creation of a West Coast Health Alliance aimed at protecting access to vaccines. The alliance by blue state governors coming amid growing turmoil at HHS and public critiques of RFK Jr.'s leadership. In a joint news release, Governors Newsom, Kotek, and Ferguson said the CDC had become a, quote, political tool that increasingly peddles ideology instead of science, unquote. Harvard University, meantime, scoring a major legal victory in its battle with the Trump administration today after a court ruled the U.S. illegally froze more than $2 billion in research funding. According to a federal judge, the U.S. government violated Harvard's free speech rights and did not follow proper procedures when it suspended a wide range of research grants in April. The ruling paves the way for the funding to be released to the school, although the administration can still appeal.
And the Trump administration is moving to block the development of more offshore wind projects. It's the latest in a series of setbacks for the industry that's caught the president's attention. The administration is now working to withdraw a permit for the New England Wind 1 and 2 offshore projects in Massachusetts. According to Bloomberg NEF, the total valuation of the projects is more than $14 billion. Massachusetts Governor Maura Healey spoke exclusively to Bloomberg earlier today and called for the administration to work with the states rather than against them.
As governor, I am very focused on lowering costs for residents, for businesses. That includes energy costs. One thing we don't need is energy supply to our region cut off. And unfortunately, that's what we're seeing by the Trump administration's move to kill jobs and to literally take away power by dismantling wind operations on the East Coast.
Pretty great time to have the U.S. Energy Secretary with us. Wright joining us now to talk about this and some of the other major developments in the energy space. It's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and Radio, Mr. Secretary. That review we were just talking about follows last week's cancellation of the Revolution Wind project in New England. Should we assume now, through the eyes of this administration, and we've heard the president talk about wind quite a lot, that it is not a viable resource for the grid? Is the domestic wind industry dead?
I think in the One Big Beautiful Bill, President Trump advocated we remove the subsidies for wind. Look, offshore wind is twice as expensive as onshore wind, and we wouldn't have a big onshore wind industry without a lot of subsidies. So, yeah, I would say the economic outlook for offshore wind in the United States is not promising. But that's not just in the United States. Look, 3 countries went all in offshore wind: Germany, Denmark, and the United Kingdom, and they now all compete for the most expensive electricity in the world. That's not the path President Trump wants America headed down.
Secretary Wright, those are the 3 countries that also invest in the wind sector in the United States, notably Denmark, Ørsted, Vestas, even some of the others in Scandinavia. For an administration that's been pushing foreign direct investment onto the states, doesn't this disincentivize that from the very countries you're speaking about?
We absolutely want foreign direct investment in the United States from all over the place, but these should be projects that are viable without subsidies, and that add to our economy and add to the profits of the investors. Offshore wind has been entirely a government-mandated, government-funded business. The U.S. did have 4 years going down the European pathway of expensive, government-driven, unreliable energy. And President Trump ran on reversing that. And, surprise, surprise, he got in power and is reversing it. His goal is affordable, reliable, secure energy that makes the lives of Americans better. It's pretty simple.
Secretary Wright, let's talk about another source of energy then, and that, of course, is oil. We've heard the president talk about secondary or tertiary sanctions when it comes to buyers of Russian oil. Talk to us about who that could potentially include outside of, say, India, for example. Are you thinking about Hungary, Slovakia, even Turkey, a NATO member? Who is that targeting?
Look, the goal for President Trump here, this is entirely based on war. He's just trying to bring peace to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which has been a brutal 3.5-year conflict so far. He's looking for any way he can to bring the parties to the table and get a peace. Russia's main source of revenue, and certainly what's funding its war machine, is its exports of oil and natural gas. Most of Russian exported oil, about 90% of it, is bought by China and India. So here's a way where he's trying to dramatically reduce Russia's ability to export oil so they can't fund the war machine, and it'll bring peace.
Can you shed some light on the plan if this doesn't go the way the president wants to, Secretary? President Trump today referred in the Oval Office to a second or even third phase of secondary sanctions. Do you plan to unpack them in layers like that if Russia does not stop killing civilians in Ukraine?
Look, the president is a master negotiator, and I'm certainly not going to leak his plans that might be coming. His goal is to put as little pressure as possible and get to the right result. So right now, he's waiting to see if the trajectory we're on right now brings the parties together for peace. And if it doesn't, as you heard him say, of course, there's additional steps. But I certainly won't be leaking those today.
Secretary, have you done the math on what the cost is to American energy consumption? Every time sanctions are put on India, Russia, China, Europe, that, of course, has a cost on the global oil market and feeds right back into the cost on American consumers. What's the math on that?
The math on that is the way you keep oil prices down is you encourage supply, particularly supply in the United States. The United States is actually a net oil exporter today. And President Trump has taken a number of actions, both through his executive pen, through the Department of Energy, and through the One Big Beautiful Bill to grow American oil production, which is at all-time highs today. And gasoline on an inflation-adjusted price is about as low as it's been in 2 decades. So I think we're on a pretty good track there. He wants more energy produced in the United States, lower energy prices, and more energy-consuming industries to locate in the United States. I think he's on a great path.
Well, Secretary Wright, you're talking about more supply hitting the market, but the Baker Hughes rig count has been down this year by a significant margin. Most of that supply isn't coming from the states on the global market. It's coming from OPEC. How do you justify that to the American consumer and the South that is dependent on that energy production?
The rig count is down right now because oil prices have come down. That's a benefit for consumers. That does make it tougher for oil and gas companies. But oil production today is still at record highs. And we have the low oil, gasoline, diesel prices, input chemicals for petrochemicals. They're all in a very healthy place right now. And I think we'll continue to see that trajectory. He's lowering the costs of oil producers as well. We've got to do everything we can to lower their costs so at increasingly low oil prices, they can make a profit and continue to drill. That's what he did in his first term, and that's what he's doing in the second term. And again, quite excited about the trajectory we're on.
Well, we've talked quite a bit here on Bloomberg with you, Secretary, about the hunger for more energy, thanks to the incredible number of data centers that are sprouting up like weeds around the country. We're no strangers to them here, right near Northern Virginia, the data center capital of the world. And so there's a big question about how we can continue to provide more clean, renewable energy. I know that nuclear may be a long-term answer, but in the meantime, it seems to be LNG. When will you cut the ribbon on a new pipeline to deliver LNG to the data centers that need it?
Oh, there's a lot of that going on right now. And these are mostly smaller or local pipelines, but you're 100% right. That's a good reminder note to me. I need to go out to one of those ribbon cutting for these new connector pipelines. But yeah, come with me. Because look, as you said, the natural gas we consume in the U.S., of course, is not LNG. It stays in a gasified form. It's much cheaper. It's transported by pipeline. Huge energy costs for the United States. It's by far our biggest source of electricity today, and I think its market share will only grow as it expands. It'll be the dominant supply of new energy for artificial intelligence, for AI. We need somewhere about 100 gigawatts of more firm capacity in the next 4 or 5 years. That's a stretch, but I think Team America and with President Trump's leadership, we'll get it done.
Secretary Wright, you talk about reclaiming market share, especially on the LNG story. Over the weekend, we've seen China and India reinforcing their commitments and even increasing them when it comes to buying some of the gas supply, specifically from Russia. Does that eat into your market share when it comes to U.S. LNG exports to Asian consumers?
So it is the fastest growing energy source on the planet. Russia, almost all of Russia's gas went west into the European market, 4 pipelines. And then, of course, Russia proved what a reliable supplier they are. And in all their European customers, they're not off all Russian gas yet, but they are rushing to do that. American LNG is filling that hole. Russia had 1 pipeline going east, the Power of Siberia, that went to China. And now they've made an agreement to build a second line that'll be the Power of Siberia 2 that will go to China. But, Russia's got 1 customer. The United States has got about 50 customers around the world, and I think we'll have 100 customers in the next few years. So, yeah, of course, Russia's going to sell gas to China. That's okay. But I feel pretty good about U.S. competition in supplying natural gas around the world. It's our fastest growing export.
Your Energy Department Secretary, I don't mean to interrupt, was out with a report just a couple of weeks ago, the end of July, around climate impacts from energy production. We spent some time with it here today in the newsroom. Is climate no longer a concern for the Energy Department?
I would say we've just put climate change in its rightful place. It is a real physical phenomenon. It's a slow-moving phenomenon. I've studied it for 20 years, as have many scientists around the country. But we need to put it in its rightful place. We hear so much it's a crisis, it's causing every storm or hurricane or flood, and those things are just false. So what we did with that climate report, 90% of what's in that climate report is straight out of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports that are done every 6 or 7 years from scientists around the world. For people that are scientifically literate, it's actually not controversial what's in that report. It's just kind of we publish the quiet part so that the Americans can have a more realistic view of this phenomenon. It's just not even close to the world's greatest problem. But that's the only reason we've justified putting expensive wind turbines up. Why should we burden Americans with expensive electricity prices and scare our children and push businesses away in the name of like a crisis that's going to end the world in a few years? None of that is in the climate science. We're very excited to have an open, robust, data, fact-based climate debate. I'm thrilled about that paper and couldn't be more pleased with the 5 authors who wrote it.
Secretary Wright, I'm visiting here in Washington from London, and I'm sad to be here because I feel like I'm missing your trip to Europe, where I'm usually based. Walk us through your message to your European partners when you make it to Milan next month.
Yeah, so of course I'll talk about what's happened in natural gas in the United States and the world. I already mentioned it's 40% of the expansion of world energy production in the last 14 years. 40% comes from one source, natural gas. And look, I think we've got a lot of credit here for the American shale revolution. We've more than doubled American natural gas production, lowered the cost by more than half. And that allows us to win the AI race, to reshore manufacturing in our country, but also to supply our allies around the world so they can get energy from secure allies as opposed to adversaries and foes that are uncertain. Think of all the money that went into building those 4 gigantic Russian pipelines into Europe and then the Russian troops go along one of those pipelines that goes right through Ukraine and invade that country and that neighbor. I think that made everyone realize energy is absolutely critical. It's critical to economic security. It's critical to national security. I'd say those 2 points, that's why President Trump got elected. That's a center of his agenda.
Okay, Secretary, it's good to have you back with us. Energy Secretary Christopher Wright on Bloomberg, thank you. Coming up, more on all of today's top stories when we convene our political panel. Plus, the news from Attorney General Bondi and Homeland Security Secretary Noem on the ground in Louisiana as they look to extend their immigration crackdown and detentions. We'll have a report ahead on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
We're making a determination now. Do we go to Chicago or do we go to a place like New Orleans, where we have a great governor, Jeff Landry, who wants us to come in and straighten out a very nice section of this country that's become quite tough, quite bad. So we're going to be going to maybe Louisiana.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kristi Gupta in Washington, where President Trump spoke earlier today on his tentative plans to send federal troops to patrol Louisiana. The state's Republican Governor Jeff Landry is also backing plans to send immigrants and detainees to the notorious prison Angola. Today, Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem and Attorney General Pam Bondi visited the max security prison that could provide up to 450 beds there. And Bloomberg's Myles Miller is traveling with them and joins us with more from Angola. Myles?
Yeah, that's right. And we're waiting for that announcement to happen. But what we do know is that there are already some migrants who are being housed here behind me. It's being called Camp 57. The 57th governor of this state is Jeff Landry. And they're also calling it the Louisiana lockup. What we know is that it has the capacity to hold roughly just under about 420 migrants. And they are saying that it's going to be the worst of the worst offenders who will be here. This is an announcement that is being held with Pam Bondi as well as Kristi Noem, the deputy director of ICE. And the focus of it is to hold these folks in detention here, which is one of the largest maximum security facilities in the country. We are situated right against the Mississippi River, and it is one of the most secure places. And this does get at a policy with ICE, and then that people who are detained by ICE are not supposed to be in punitive settings. And here at Camp 57, most of it has been set up as
I think we've lost Myles Miller, Bloomberg's Myles Miller, of course, there in Louisiana and reporting for us from location. We thank you so much. I'm sure we'll come back to him in the coming days. Earlier this hour, though, we talked to Republican Congressman Byron Donalds about the ongoing battle over the release of the Epstein files. Take a listen to what he had to say.
What I do support is the Oversight Committee's approach to making sure that that information is gone through, that survivors are protected, and then those files are released. And so there are some concerns on the Hill about Representative Massey's approach, that it would not actually protect survivors who, by the way, some of which have not come forward, some of which may choose not to be known publicly. I think this has to be a systematic process about how we release those files.
All right, so why don't we turn away from that detention center where Myles was and embrace this story once again, as Jeffrey Epstein has been occupying a lot of time and conversation here in the Capitol. With us now, our political panel for this evening. Republican strategist Matt Gorman is back with us, Executive Vice President at Targeted Victory, alongside Democratic strategist Kristen Hahn, partner at Rock Solutions. It's great to see you both.
Good to see you.
We're still talking about it. We're picking up right where we left off before everybody went home for August recess. What will be the impact of Epstein victims brought forth today to hold a news conference in town? Republicans are kind of picking their angle. They're either with the Oversight Committee or a discharge petition to have these files released.
I think at its core right now, Republicans have the benefit of having the leader of this from the Republican side, Thomas Massie, not being very popular in the party at all, to say the least. And so that helps and gives a modicum of distance, I think, between him and the rest of the party. Now, look, I think Republicans are looking for some sort of play call from the White Wright is and how they handle this, right? This was a very impactful ceremony, or I should say press conference with the Epstein victims, and that obviously should be respected. I think people on the Hill are looking for what can they do? If it's not a discharge petition, how can they obviously have some sort of movement towards the victims here, but not give in to kind of what Democrats are looking for?
Well, Kristen, weigh in here. What is that middle ground?
It's also what Massey's looking for, and it's also what a lot of, the president keeps saying that this is a Democratic manufactured thing, and it's just not. It came up from his own supporters who he told that he was going to look into it. So I think, I think that I thought it was very compelling that you had the victims speaking, a lot of whom hadn't come out before, and it was a bipartisan group of members of Congress who are staying out in front of Capitol. I do understand, getting too much in the weeds on whether it's a discharge petition or whether it's something that comes out of this committee. This is something that we pay attention to in Washington. I'm not sure people outside the Beltway really care about that.
Well, the president called it a Democrat hoax today, and we asked Byron Donalds about that. He suggested that Democrats don't care about this. It's a political motivation, and said repeatedly that Democrats do not care about the victims. How would you respond to it?
I've always said this. Even spending 23 years in D.C., I'm not so cynical that I think that just because you have an RID attached to your name means you all of a sudden don't care about victims like this or people in general. So I think that it took a lot of guts for these members to come together from both sides of the aisle to stand with the victims. And I choose to decide to believe that there is honesty and earnestness in what they were doing today.
Well, in their comments today, their heartbreaking comments, they did talk about putting together a client list on their own, maybe not even taking the government out of the equation altogether. Matt, if there's that inevitability, what's the fallout?
Well, I think we'll have to see what comes of that exactly. And if a client list existed, if it doesn't exist, that seems to be the clear debate here. I think what I come back to is if this were such an important thing for Democrats, where were they during the 4 years that this was lingering under Joe Biden, right? I think that's a very fair critique. And I think that's number two. Well, while this might have bubbled up, certainly on the right, one of the things I think has galvanized the right is having folks like Jamie Raskin and folks on the left suddenly take the front tip of the spear for this. So I think that having the right enemy, so to speak, that helps kind of keep the conservatives at bay.
Marjorie Taylor Greene keeping the wrong company then?
I think that's the clear thing is, right, Thomas Massey being the head of this, less so Marjorie Taylor Greene, but Thomas Massey being the head of this helps our side in a way, it helps consolidate, and as we see Byron Donalds and others kind of sticking in the tent, so to speak.
Let's talk about the other, I think, piece of news I think took us all by surprise today, and that is some potential thoughts and reporting, I think, from the New York Times and from the New York Post as well, talking about the mayoral election and where Donald Trump may consider the possibility of taking out Eric Adams and other contenders perhaps to make way for Cuomo. That's how worried he is about Mamdani. Your initial take?
I think that you look at a city like New York and you saw, Mamdani, I don't sit in the same type of political space that he does as a Democrat, but I see how he can be captivating to voters because he's talking about the things that they care about. And too often as Democrats, we don't talk about those things. He's talking about how expensive it is to live there. And there was just something that they glommed onto. And I think it's really interesting that the President of the United States is considering, everybody's kind of putting their statements out in the press. And do we know whether Eric Adams is going to take a potential appointment from the President of the United States? But I thought that was all very interesting.
We think this is real. So Donald Trump's going to clear a lane for a Democrat he's going to take Curtis Sliwa out of the race?
That's the other issue, too, right? Sliwa is not a normal MAGA Republican. He might not be guaranteed to take that slot either. And I think also what I would caution is sometimes, if this looks to be engineered towards Cuomo, and there's an alignment either tacitly or overtly between Trump and Cuomo, that hurts Cuomo as well. So I think the White House has to be very definite how they do this. But look, at its heart, it is the right sort of move. Something needs to happen. You can't have four people all getting 20% where Mamdani gets 28 and becomes the mayor. So there needed to be something to move. So I think the instincts are right. How they go about it's going to be very key.
You don't think Donald Trump wants to keep him around as a foil? Mamdani's good for business.
But he also, very true, but he also loves New York. You know that. So I think that you can take very clear who the
We'll see what happens. It's only a report for now. Matt Corman and Kristen Hahn, many thanks for your insights on all the stories that we're following today. And you can read a lot more about them by checking out the Washington Edition newsletter. Find it on the terminal and online. Thank you for joining us, as always, on Balance of Power. Alongside Kristi Gupta in Washington, I'm Joe Matthew. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.